Imagine your commanding officer hands you a pistol and a flashlight, points at a hole in the ground. No radio, no backup, no room to turn around. Your job is to go in. Beneath the jungles of South Vietnam, the Viet Cong had built over 250 kilometers of tunnels, hidden rooms, booby traps, underground field hospitals, entire command centers buried 30 feet below the surface. US command needed to know what was down there. So they sent in the smallest soldiers they could find. They called them tunnel rats. The tunnel network didn't appear overnight. The Viet Cong had been digging since the 1940s, first against the French, then the Americans. By the mid-1960s, the Cu Chi district alone contained over 250 kilometers of connected tunnels. The tunnels were hand-dug using simple tools: hose, bare hands. The dirt was carried out at night, so American reconnaissance planes wouldn't spot the displaced soil during the day. The tunnels were deliberately narrow, 18 inches wide in some sections, barely enough for a small Vietnamese fighter to pass through. For an American soldier, getting in at all was a problem. Getting in and fighting was another matter entirely. The entrances were hidden under false floors, beneath cooking fires, inside dense brush. Some were covered with trapdoors so perfectly camouflaged they were impossible to find unless you already knew where to look. Inside, the Viet Cong had built a world. In some sections, there were small theaters where fighters watched films, and everywhere, traps, punji stake pits beneath false floors, tripwires connected to grenades, trapdoors that opened over sharpened bamboo, poisonous snakes tied to trip lines in the dark. The Viet Cong had been living in these tunnels for years. They knew every turn, every shaft, every false wall. The Americans going in did not. A tunnel rat went in with almost nothing. Standard rifle, useless. Too long, too loud, and in a tunnel, the muzzle blast in an enclosed space could rupture your own eardrums. Most tunnel rats carried a .45 caliber pistol. Some preferred a .38 revolver. The reasoning was simple. A revolver doesn't eject spent casings. In total darkness, you don't want to hear something hit the ground and not know if it's a casing or a grenade. In one hand, a flashlight. In the other, the pistol. That was it. Some carried a knife. A few brought a length of string to mark which direction they'd come from. There were gas masks, though the tunnels were often too tight to wear them properly. Some soldiers brought a bayonet to probe the ground ahead for tripwires before each step. No body armor. No radio. If something went wrong 30 feet underground, there was no calling for help. You handled it alone, or you didn't come back. The men chosen were typically smaller soldiers, under 5'6", lean build. Not because command thought it would be easier for them, but because there was physically no other way to get through. Sergeant Bernard Judd of the 25th Infantry Division entered over 100 tunnels during his tour. He kept no record of how many he cleared. He said counting would have made it feel like a job. Specialist Harold Roper recalled coming face-to-face with a Viet Cong fighter in a tunnel so narrow that neither man could raise his weapon fully. They looked at each other for what he described as a very long second. The other man went backward. Roper went forward. He never fired a shot. There were others who were not as fortunate. Tunnel rats had no official designation in the army. There was no badge, no special pay grade, no formal training program for most of the war. A soldier was told to go in, and either he did or he didn't. The ones who did developed their own informal code. They shared what they learned with each other, passed down techniques, warned each other about specific tunnel systems they'd encountered. They called themselves tunnel rats. They made their own patch, a cartoon rat with a pistol and a flashlight. It was not an official insignia. Command never sanctioned it. It didn't matter. The men who wore it knew what it meant. The Tunnel War was never decisive. American forces destroyed sections, flooded chambers, pumped in tear gas and smoke. Engineers detonated entire networks with massive explosive charges. And the Viet Cong dug more. For every tunnel cleared, another was built. The network was not a fixed structure. It was a living system that expanded, rerouted, and adapted. By the time US forces withdrew in 1973, significant portions of the Cu Chi tunnel system were still intact and in use. Today, sections of the Cu Chi tunnels are a tourist destination. Visitors can crawl through widened passages, see preserved rooms, and handle replica weapons. The tunnels that American soldiers feared going into are now lit with electric lights and marked with English-language signs. The tunnel rats themselves received little recognition when they came home. Like most Vietnam veterans, they returned to a country that had largely stopped paying attention to the war while it was still being fought. There were no parades. The unofficial patch they'd made for themselves was often all they had. Some of them spent decades trying to get the army to formally recognize what tunnel rats had done. In 1993, the Department of Defense finally acknowledged the tunnel rat program in official records. It took nearly 30 years. The men who went into those tunnels did something that had no precedent and no playbook. They improvised a method of warfare that nobody had trained them for, in conditions that most people cannot imagine, and they did it over and over again. They are not well known. If you want to see more stories like this, soldiers and units that history passed over, subscribe. There are a lot more where this came from.
Hello. We here at Battle Docs would like to extend our thanks to the people who watch our videos. I think it's important that we remember these men and women who sacrificed so much for our country. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here. We'll see you on the next video.